So picture this, it's Christmas Day 2025, and suddenly the world's attention snaps to West Africa. Why? Because the United States just launched a series of airstrikes in Nigeria. Now, the official story you heard was all about protecting persecuted Christians. But the real story? Oh, it is so much more complicated. It's all tangled up in a web of data, deep history, resources, and some serious global power plays. So let's peel back the layers together and try to figure out what was really going on.
And this is what lit the fuse on the world stage. A single, pretty stark threat from the President of the United States. A statement that took a really complex regional conflict and just blew it up into a major international crisis. It left pretty much everyone, allies and adversaries alike, asking the exact same question. What is Washington's endgame in Nigeria?
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the bombing itself. Then, we'll look at that official story, the Holy War narrative. After that, we'll flip the script and see the counter-narrative from Nigeria. Then, we'll dig into the high-stakes game of resources, and finally, try to untangle the really contradictory alliance between these two countries.
Okay, first things first. Before we can understand any of the fallout, we have to look at the spark that ignited this whole thing, the bombing of Nigeria itself.
Okay, so here are the cold, hard facts. On Christmas Day, the U.S. confirmed it carried out multiple, and I quote, powerful and lethal airstrikes. The targets were said to be ISIS positions in the northwest of the country, an area that's become a real hotbed for violence. This was the first direct U.S. military action of this scale in Nigeria under this administration. So why? What was the official reason for such a dramatic military move? Well, that brings us to the story that Washington was putting out there. And they framed this not as some act of aggression, but as a righteous intervention, basically a holy war.
Yeah, the justification was laid out crystal clear in a post on Truth Social from President Trump himself. This was retaliation. He framed the strikes as a direct response to what he called the brutal killing of innocent Christians, warning that the U.S. would not let radical Islamic terrorism to prosper. And look, the whole argument really hinges on this number right here. Figures from certain NGOs, which have been heavily cited by politicians in Washington, claim that over 52,000 Christians have been killed by jihadists in Nigeria since 2009. I mean, that is a shocking statistic. It paints a very clear picture of a targeted religious genocide. But, there are two sides to every story. And if you look at it from the Nigerian capital, Abuja, well, you get a completely different picture. This is the counter-narrative. And the Nigerian government did not mince words. Their response was swift, calling the whole idea of a Christian genocide a grave misrepresentation of reality. They argue that boiling this incredibly complex conflict down to a simple religious war isn't just wrong, it's dangerously misleading. Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. Let's look at the data, because it really complicates that official story. This chart uses figures from a group called ACLED. It shows that the total number of all civilian deaths from violence since 2009 is around 53,000. Wait a minute. That's basically the exact same number that some groups claim for Christian deaths alone. So what that tells us is, while Christians are absolutely tragically among the victims, the violence is clearly not exclusively or maybe even primarily aimed at them. The reality on the ground is just way more nuanced. And really, when you talk to the experts, the people actually on the ground, they'll tell you this conflict is a total mess of different issues all tangled together. It goes back decades, disputes over land and water between farmers and herders. It's been supercharged by criminal gangs and kidnapping for ransom rings. And this is critical. The data shows that many, if not most, of the victims of groups like Boko Haram are actually fellow Muslims. So if it's not a simple religious war, then what else is going on? Well, that takes us a layer deeper into a high-stakes game of resources, one with roots that go way back in history and are all tangled up in today's geopolitics. Look, you absolutely cannot get what's happening in Nigeria now without a quick history lesson on the Biafran War in the late 60s. The oil-rich southeast tried to secede, and it kicked off a brutal conflict. The war ended, sure, but it carved these deep fault lines between the mostly Christian Igbo people in the south and the Muslim-dominated north. Fault lines that are still being exploited today over who controls the country's incredible wealth. And this leads a lot of people to a much more cynical take on why the U.S. is really there. As this analysis from the journal Revista de Frente puts it, the goal isn't saving people, it's about securing economic dominance. The argument is that the U.S. is just using religious persecution as a cover story to get control of Nigeria's massive natural resources. And make no mistake, what's at stake here is huge. Nigeria is Africa's biggest oil producer. It's sitting on vast, untapped deposits of rare earth minerals, the stuff you need for all our modern tech. It's a critical piece of a planned gas pipeline to Europe, which is a huge deal for cutting reliance on Russia. And maybe most important of all, it's a key battleground in the new great game for influence in Africa between the US, China, and Russia.
So, all of this, it brings us to our final piece of the puzzle, the uneasy and frankly deeply contradictory alliance between the United States and Nigeria itself. First off, we just have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, the sheer power imbalance here. I mean, looking at the data from Global Firepower, the numbers are just staggering. The U.S. defense budget is nearly 300 times bigger than Nigeria's. The U.S. has 11 aircraft carriers. Nigeria has 0. This is not a relationship of equals, not by a long shot. Now, for years, a major sticking point in this relationship has been something called the Leahy Law. Basically, it's a U.S. law that says you can't give military aid to foreign security forces that are known to commit gross human rights abuses. And this law has been a huge obstacle in U.S.-Nigerian cooperation for a long time. And right here, this is where U.S. policy just does a complete 180 on itself. It's kind of wild. On one hand, you have the State Department pointing to the Leahy Law because of really credible reports of thousands of people dying in Nigerian military custody. But on the other hand, just a few months before the bombing, the U.S. approved a massive $346 million arms sale, bombs, rockets, to that very same military. It's a textbook example of strategic interests and human rights pulling in totally opposite directions.
And get this, the timing makes the whole thing even crazier. Just 1 week before those U.S. airstrikes, the two countries signed a massive $5.1 billion health and cooperation deal. A Nigerian minister even went on record and said their diplomatic crisis was, quote, resolved. 1 week later, American bombs are falling on Nigerian soil.
So what's the deal? Are they partners? Are they adversaries? Honestly, maybe this one image says it all. This is a screenshot from the U.S. State Department's own website for security cooperation with Nigeria. The official status appears to be technical difficulties. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's a perfect metaphor for a policy that seems confused, contradictory, and just dangerously unclear. So at the end of the day, where does this all leave us? We're looking at 3 totally different stories for why the U.S. dropped those bombs. Was it a genuine mission to save lives? Was it a modern-day grab for oil and critical minerals? Or was it just a cold, calculated move in a global power struggle against China and Russia? The truth is probably some messy, unsettling mix of all 3, which leaves us with the one question that really matters for the future of the region. What comes next?